Sorry, I'm in your way.
No, you're good. There we go.
What?
So you're just now putting their microphone up here?
Yeah, I got battery to save. Mic check 1 2 3. Mic check 1 2 3. Mic check 1 2 3.
He's 6'7".
Hmm?
He's 6'7".
Oh right. Will you call me short?
I know Andrew Bain's coming out with Ryan, so we're going to set up with the family and all, and then they're going to go first. Then they'll have, I guess they'll have questions, then they'll introduce us, and then we'll come out. So, everybody come over here, please. I'd like my team, guys, when it's on screen, we'd like our team here. Well, I'd like the team stand right here. Everybody? Identify themselves. And that way you'll know who everybody is and that. They won't be answering questions. One or two of them might make, they will make a statement, but just so you got it all. And then this is part of my team here. Well, I don't want you that close. That's the prosecutor there. So can you all cluster a little bit? Well, that hair is going to block him, so. Great hair, but it's going to block him. that to you. You need it. Let me see what I can do about getting it to you before we start. Oh, there it is. Want to get one of mine? No, I want it's proper that they do it. Thank you. Have you all been able to read through it? I mean, I skimmed through it. I'm going to be speaking to this, but I'm going to share with you some of the things that are in there.
Test, 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 test. 1, 2.
Way too many things up here. All right. Good morning, everyone. There it is. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming out this morning. Last month, we stood here and told you about the findings of the grand jury as it revolves around the officer-involved shooting that happened at the Target with the Osceola County Sheriff's Office back in 2020. We also told you that at that time, the work of the grand jury was not done. And that because of the new policy that we put in place involving officer-involved shootings, the grand jury was going to have an opportunity to weigh in about the policies and procedures they believe should be changed. Today, we are here to release those findings. While the deputies' actions in April of 2020 did not rise to the level of criminal charges, the grand jury was blunt that they said that this should have never happened. The grand jury firmly believes that ineffective and insufficient communication and training by the Orange County Sheriff's Office needlessly created the results of this tragic shooting. Just to give you a quick recap of the facts from April 2020. Most of you know that Osceola County Sheriff's Office was involved in a training exercise outside of the Target here locally in Osceola County, Florida. The officers had information that there was some shoplifting going on inside the Target and identified 2 suspects. The deputies attempted at that time to perform a tactical maneuver called a vehicle block to keep the suspects from leaving. Unfortunately, that vehicle block failed. And because of that, 2 officers fired into the vehicle, killing 1 man, injuring 2 others, while endangering walk passerbyers inside of the parking lot. After listening to all the evidence and testimony over several days, the grand jury determined the Osceola County Sheriff's Office approach to this incident was problematic, impulsive, and unplanned. They identified 5 areas that they would like to see the Osceola County Sheriff's Office work on and make improvements to prevent a similar tragedy from occurring again in our community. I'd like to bring to the microphone my Chief Assistant Ryan Williams to give you more details about the grand jury's findings.
Thanks, sir. The Osceola County Grand Jury mentioned had multiple findings concerning the event on April 27th of 2022. First, they discussed the vehicle block policy of the Osceola County Sheriff's Office, and more specifically, the lack of a policy regarding the circumstances surrounding it. The grand jury was deeply troubled that the Osceola County Sheriff's Office did not have a policy in place in 2022 that outlined when and where deputies could execute a vehicle block, and that a policy was not in place that took the circumstances surrounding a vehicle block into account. The shooting, as you all recall, happened around 7 p.m. in a busy retail parking lot. The grand jury specifically said that the vehicle block was executed impulsively and with little to no regard for the safety of bystanders. The men involved, the targets of the use of force, were accused of shoplifting, an offense that did not put the public in immediate danger. The grand jury did not believe a block was warranted in the moment based upon what deputies knew at the time about the offense and the suspected offenders. Secondly, the grand jury discussed the use of vehicle blocks for misdemeanor offenses. The grand jury expressed grave concerns about whether this was an appropriate use of force for a misdemeanor offense. They were provided and then pointed out that the deputies had several conversations before executing the vehicle block, including a discussion as to whether any crime had been committed at all. But the deputies never discussed whether the use of force was appropriate for a misdemeanor theft. Thirdly, was the lack of communication and training. The grand jury called the deputies' training surrounding the vehicle block insufficient. Everyone was not on the same page and did not know their roles. There was little to no communication about what would happen after the vehicle block that would ensure that the men inside the vehicle would be secured safely. One of the deputies involved in the vehicle block was a trainee on the day of the incident, and it is not clear what, if any, experience that specific deputy had in conducting a vehicle block. In their report, the grand jury is clear that deputies left an opening during the block that allowed the car's driver to move forward and into the pathway of a deputy who had gotten out of the vehicle after the block failed. That lack of communication and poor training resulted in the deputy intentionally and needlessly placing himself in the path of a moving vehicle, creating circumstances where the deadly use of force occurred. The grand jury also discussed the need for body-worn cameras. The grand jury recommends that all deputies anticipating the detention or arrest of a member of the public wear a body-worn camera. There was no body-worn camera footage of this incident, and that created a big challenge for the members of the grand jury charged with reviewing it. If body-worn cameras had been used, it would have been clear who was where and left no questions as to what was said and what commands were issued in the moment. Now, to be fair to the Osceola County Sheriff's Office, they have made a number of changes to their policy since this incident in 2022. Specifically as to vehicle blocks. Since the incident, the Sheriff's Office has updated its policy to specifically consider the following risk factors before determining that a vehicle block should occur. Those circumstances include the time of day, the weather, the location, the presence of civilian or pedestrian vehicle traffic, and their ability to control it, the type of vehicle that is the target, and the status of the deputy's communications. There have also been changes to the policy regarding which offenses or what type of offenses are eligible for a vehicle block, and more specifically, the Osceola County Sheriff's Office policy now specifically states that that tactic is only appropriate for felony crimes and based upon the totality of the circumstances that do not create an unnecessary risk to deputies or the public. Thirdly, the new policy discusses deputies placing themselves in harm's way. It now prevents deputies directly involved in executing vehicle blocks from exiting their vehicle until the suspect is fully compliant with officers and keys are removed from the car and placed outside the vehicle. However, the grand jury believes the Sheriff's Office should further update this policy to ensure that any passenger law enforcement officers in the vehicles are not out of the vehicle prior to the subject being subdued. The Sheriff's Office amended policy also expressly prevents deputies now from intentionally positioning themselves in the path of a moving vehicle or its potential for escape. It now requires deputies to attempt to move to safety rather than firing their weapon at the vehicle if they find themselves in harm's way.
We recognize the profound effect that officer-involved shootings have on loved ones in our community and law enforcement. This tragic situation has had effects on multiple families, individuals, law enforcement officers in our community. We are very mindful that a young man has lost his life and his loved ones are still grieving and hurting in the process. We also recognize that one of the young men should have not even been there on that day, except for the fact that he was homeless. We understand that there are constraints on local governments and state agencies when it results around resources for these young people. But we need to put more effort in our community to ensure and increase efforts that young people and youth have a safe place to develop and grow when they become homeless. This is a growing number and a growing problem in our community. The number of homeless youth have continued to exceed and increase every year, especially after 2020 during the COVID pandemic. The grand jury has done great work on this case. I want to thank them for their time and dedication for these last few months and appreciate their insights and recommendations. The presentment or the report from the grand jury has been given to the Osceola County Sheriff's Office, as well as the attorney for the victims in this case and their families. We will post the entire report and presentment on our webpage so the entire public can read it in its entirety. It also has been shared with our law enforcement partners throughout the circuit and all our different agencies so that they also can see what the public would like to see inside of their policies and review those policies to see if they ensure the safety of all in our community. However, although we recognize that we cannot force law enforcement to make those recommendations, it is our firm belief that by the community having a voice in this conversation, that gives them the ability to recommend those things and get them implemented in the world they want to see in their community. I'd like to open it up for some on-topic questions if you have any.
Is there any sort of follow-up that would be done to check in on whether these policies are instituted?
Well, we will continue to work with our partners in the meetings that we have and attorney to address any issues that we see going forward and see if there is somewhere we can make improvements. Because at the end of the day, my job is public safety, and we want to make sure that we are ensuring the public at all times.
You had said back in September that this would be the first use of force case to go before a grand jury. How do you feel this process went?
I think that it was fair. I think that the grand jury had an opportunity to have their voices heard. I think that we presented a case that was complete in its nature and that the recommendations are appropriate for this case.
State Attorney, we still have multiple agencies, including this one here, that don't use body cameras in Central Florida. How difficult does that make your job as a prosecutor, and what difference does it make if they actually put those in place for all their officers today?
I believe at this point, almost all our agencies, even some of the smaller ones, have body-worn cameras. I know several years ago it became a new thing, but since 2020, there has been a substantial increase in those body-worn cameras being used. The situation that occurred in this particular case had to do with a policy situation, not the availability of body-worn camera.
Could you talk some about what you hope will come out of this?
We hope that better policing and change happens. I think that's the goal. We want better policing in our community. We want our community to be safe from danger, whether it be from law enforcement or not. We want our law enforcement officers to be safe in what they do. This situation created both of those things. Law enforcement found themselves in a precarious situation, but again, somebody then lost their lives, and so 2 other people were shot. As well as you watched the video, there are other passerbyers that could have been injured during that process. So this is something that we feel that will have a strong effect in our community.
You said this is the first use of force case. Have you determined what the next one is going to be for grand jury?
We have several in the pipeline right now. This is the first one since the policy was implemented, but there will be more coming in coming months.
And when you say better policing, what does that look like?
It means safer policing. It means that everybody goes home safely. You hear me talk about de-escalation or de-escalation trainings. It's the same concept. We want to make sure that every single person, when they come in contact with law enforcement, gets home safely, whether it be the law enforcement officer or whether it be the citizen that's involved in the interaction. All right. And thank you all for coming, and have a great day.
Andrew.
Mr. Nijame, and the family will be available to speak with you all about what's going on with their case and their situation.
Good morning, everybody. Before I get started, my name is Mark Nijame, and I want to introduce some of our team that has been working on this endlessly. We've been providing information to the state attorney. We have asked for thank you. I wanted to introduce some of our team. We've been providing information. We've been on this case for over a year now, and we have are very thankful for the approach that has taken place. I'd like to introduce you to some of my team who's worked relentlessly on this. Steve Calvaca, Michelle Incandela, and Delane Penland. But before I get started, I think it's most appropriate to introduce you to the victims' family members who are all here. You'll need to speak up because they're not mic'd, but I want them to be recognized. They deserve to be recognized for the victims that they are and the recognition that the State Attorney's Office has given them as victims in this senseless situation that occurred at the hands of the Osceola County Sheriff's Office under the leadership of Sheriff Marcus Lopez. So I'll just go right down the line if you all just simply identify who you are and your relationship to the young men that were involved. Everybody needs to speak up really loud, please.
Paris Gomez, Michael's little sister.
Michael Gomez, Alejandro Baez, Jaden's dad.
Rodney Lowe, Joseph's dad.
Paola Lowe, Joseph's sister. Anaís Mateo, Joseph's little sister.
Thank you all. I have several comments. I know you all just simply got the presentment and have not had time to go through it. I will be pointing out some of the cogent parts of it and addressing that. But before I do, I want to thank especially the dedicated, courageous, and concerned members of the grand jury who cared enough for the people of Osceola County to issue this report. In my decades of being a lawyer, fighting for those injured and those who have suffered injustices, I've never seen anything quite like it. And when you read it, I think you'll be similarly beyond impressed and touched by the sensitivity, the compassion, and the understanding that they illustrated. It makes me proud to know that we have such people who care enough in our community to do the right thing for no other reason but for the sake of doing the right thing. They receive no money, no attention. In fact, they're anonymous. There's no glory in this. But they wanted to come forward to speak to the injustices that they saw under the leadership of Sheriff Marcos Lopez, or the lack of leadership, I should say, and those deputies involved. Significantly, I must thank State Attorney Andrew Bain, who also wanted to do the right thing and established this grand jury consideration for those who are victims of excessive police force or violence or have the risk of death. This was a novel and brave approach to an issue that needs to be addressed in many communities, especially this community. And so we thank him for that. And I must especially want to thank Chief Assistant State Attorney Ryan Williams. The pressure put upon him by so many, because there's so many people who did not understand this, was enormous. And he kept his nose to the ground, he did the right thing, and he remained resolute in his commitment to ferret out the wrongdoing and to find the truth and to establish the truth. So Ryan, we thank you. Mr. Williams, we thank you immensely for the dedication that you gave to this case. I've already thanked my amazing team who worked relentlessly. I don't think people understand the criticism, the ridicule, the mockery, the threats sometimes that occur when you're handling a case like this. But we did not stop. We were relentless in our efforts to bring out the truth. We're so thankful to the State Attorney's Office for listening to us, and as we proceeded forward with the media and getting the truth out about what happened. Unfortunately, my words are not so generous as it relates to Sheriff Marcos Lopez of Osceola County and some of his cronies. His policies, procedures, practices, and protocols are what led to this reign of terror. Remember, after this unnecessary and brutal murder and maiming of these young men, Sheriff Lopez took to the airwaves and ratified the conduct of the deputies. He didn't say we need to make changes. He didn't say I'm sorry. He didn't say we did something wrong. He said we did everything right. And this grand jury has spoken loud and clear. He did not do anything right, and neither of these policies, practices, and procedures that he instituted and were followed by others on the site who were in control are horrific and dangerous to the community. I want to point out some of the findings. You all have them, but I think you're not going to have time to read them before we conclude. I want to read you some of the excerpts. It is from the grand jury. It is our firm conclusion that ineffective and insufficient communication and training by the Osceola County Sheriff's Office needlessly created circumstances that resulted in this tragic shooting. Blame falls squarely on the shoulders of the Osceola County Sheriff's Office and the sheriff himself. They go on page 1. We have serious concerns regarding the problematic, ill-planned, impulsive approach the Osceola County Sheriff's Office used when executing the vehicle block that resulted in one man's death and injuries to 2 others. Page 7. Our conclusion bluntly, it's their words, our conclusion bluntly is that this should not have happened. Our findings uncovered grave concerns about whether the appropriate amount of force was used to apprehend misdemeanor shoplifters and how insufficient training around vehicle blocks and a lack of communication needlessly created circumstances where a deputy was faced with death or great bodily harm. Page 7, the vehicle block was impulsively executed with little to no regard for any innocent victims in the parking lot. Law enforcement is supposed to be here to serve and protect us, not to endanger us. And that's what they did, as by the finding of the grand jury, who are citizens of the community who wanted to come forward and speak out about what they saw happening. They go on, it is our firm belief that the circumstance of this case did not warrant a vehicle block based on what was known about the offense and offenders. And one of the biggest challenges we had in reviewing the case was the lack of body camera footage. You heard that from the state attorney. And then they went through the logs. And if you take a look at the detail that they spent going through every bit of this case, they were so schooled, so studied, so concerned, so compassionate. And then at the end, after this poorly planned and poorly executed vehicle block, they saved their last words for Sheriff Lopez. And I think this is really important to bring out, because it's either indifference to the community or cowardice on behalf of Sheriff Lopez by what he did not do when the grand jury wanted to speak to him. They specifically, on the last page, if you'll read, in conclusion, we appreciate that law enforcement is a dangerous profession. They go on. Every law enforcement agency, like any other agency or organization, has a leader. It's on page 12 on conclusion. This person represents the entire agency or organization and is ultimately responsible for the decisions each member of the agency or organization makes on a daily basis. We invited Sheriff Marcos Lopez to come testify before us so that he could have an opportunity to address our concerns with his agency's actions. He declined to appear before us and instead provided other members, of his agency to appear and testify. Because we feel the gravity of this situation warrants the sheriff's appearance before us, we in turn decline his invitation to have other members of his agency testify instead of him. That was their final conclusion. So it was either indifference or cowardice that he didn't come before this grand jury, representative of the citizens of Osceola County, to speak to this tragedy that was caused by his policies, his procedures, his protocols. Why did he not show up? And I'll answer that for you. Because he was wrong and he was afraid, and his actions and those of those who he created this culture that allowed this type of tragedy, death and maiming to occur, rests on his shoulders. And those who he trained who followed those procedures. We're available for any questions if anybody has any.
So what does this mean for your lawsuit against the sheriff?
Well, it supports what we've been saying all along. We could not have written this report any better ourselves. It's everything we've been saying, and for those who were doubting what we said, we're trying to put blame on young men who were, no question, committing shoplifting. $42, $43 worth of Pokemon cards and a pizza. This should have never happened. This is exactly what we've been saying. And we are so sad that it had to happen in the first place. But we hope that these families are serving through their losses, through what they've had to go through, now is effectuating some changes. And I know that Alejandro's father, on behalf of everybody, wanted to say a few words. Alejandro, this is Alejandro Baez. I'm sorry, I'll come back up in a moment.
Just want to say that me, Jaden's mother, and our family, and these victims also are happy that the grand jury decided for change. That's something that needs to happen. I miss my son every day. I just don't want no other family, parents to have to go through something like this. It's not a good feeling to keep living your life knowing that you'll never see your child again. So just want to tell my lawyer and his team, thank you for everything they do, and just pray that with the grand jury's decision, we do have some change.
Thank you, Alejandro. The family will not be taking any questions because, as it was mentioned, there is litigation and will be ongoing litigation, so it would be appropriate for them to comment during the course of the proceedings rather than here. Does anybody else have any questions or anything that they'd like to know or comment about? The facts in the presentment, the question was, will the presentment be able to be used in the lawsuit? The facts that they've detailed, much of it we knew, some of it we did not because it wasn't available to us during the course of the case or discovery yet. So the fact is that some of the analysis they did was spectacular, and it's consistent with our expert, our police expert, who is really top of his field, and showing that this was absolutely excessive force, needless, dangerous, all as a result of policies, procedures, practices, and protocols from this department led by Sheriff Marcos Lopez.
Are you able to say what details you didn't know that you weren't aware of ahead of the
Well, some of the direct communications, the radio communications, had not been yet brought to us. That was the radio communications that were going on between the various officers. That speaks to the lack of communication that's brought out in the presentment. We would be getting it, but we hadn't gotten it yet. They had the power of subpoena. They had the power of presentment from the State Attorney and the Assistant State Attorney to bring it before them. So this all the more confirms and corroborates everything we've been saying.
What questions are still out there? What haven't you been able to find out?
You know, we think after a year we've done this pretty thoroughly. We think we know what happened. I will say that the one thing that this has not fully addressed that we know about, and that is the cover-ups. We all know that several reports were filed 9 days, I believe it was, after this incident. We know of now one supposedly notarized statement that was not signed and notarized by the person who purportedly signed it. And we know that those 5 documents were all, by the police reports 9 days later, were all done at the same minute, the same second, the same time, same day by the same notary, which we know is extremely suspicious, outside of protocols. And we believe that there's clearly a cover-up that has been occurring, and part of our job is to continue going into that. That was not the grand jury's job, but that's part of our job. We think that they could not have done a better, more compassionate, and more intelligent job than they've done.
This isn't your only case involving the Osceola County Sheriff's Office, and the state attorney was mentioning that some of their procedures have already changed since this incident occurred.
Well,
have you seen that?
I'm going to focus on this case, if I may, and we're heartened to see that because we believe that if there is in fact changes, that other lives will not be as damaged and affected so negatively and so hurtfully as has happened here. With that said, it's more than policies, it's culture, and the culture within this department is abhorrent from all that we know, from all that we've investigated. So you can change policy. We already have laws on the books that people should not do certain things and should act in a certain way. But if people want to violate that, they're going to violate it. And the culture that we have determined that exists within this department is dangerous to the community, as we've seen, and has been pointed out by the grand jury. And all the more confirmed by the change of policy. Because if the policy was appropriate, as he ratified when all this happened, and he took a press conference and said we didn't do anything wrong. Well, no, he ratified it, and now they're trying to make excuses for it. Should have never happened in the first place. Thank you, everybody. It's actually been 2 years, but it goes fast. It's actually been 2 years since this happened. Thank you all very much. If you have any questions, you all know how to reach us.